We don't often think of our skeletons as lively, dynamic tissue, especially around Halloween, when the skeletons we see are the spooky, brittle ones in people's houses and in doorways. But your bones are actually living, vibrant tissue that continuously adapt and reshape throughout your life. Physical activity and exercise force our bones to work against gravity, strengthening them. However, if you've ever been injured where you were immobilized or casted or required extended bed rest, your bones adapt to your new reduced loading environment by getting weaker, and the consequences can be devastating. Bone loss is a major concern for astronauts who spend their days floating in microgravity. Astronauts typically fly to the International Space Station for 6 months at a time. What happens to their skeletons after floating for 6 months? Could they safely stay longer or even travel to Mars? This is where my postdoctoral research comes in. I use high-resolution bone imaging, which measures bone on a scale finer than a human hair, to understand bone loss from spaceflight. My work is part of the T-bone study, funded by the Canadian Space Agency, where we image the wrists and the ankles of astronauts before and after their space missions. I'd like to share a few intriguing results so far. First, as anticipated, bone loss in space was rapid. To provide perspective, average loss over 6 months was similar to what we'd expect to see over 2 decades in older adults on Earth. So an astronaut who went up to space with a 40-year-old skeleton, you got it, came back home with a skeleton looking more like a 60-year-old. Houston, we have a problem here. Second, rapid bone loss only occurred in the lower limbs, bones that support our body weight on Earth. Bone loss didn't occur in the upper limbs. Why not? Well, quite frankly, your upper limbs aren't loaded all that much on Earth, so transitioning to weightlessness wasn't as great a change for the upper limbs. Finally, can these changes in the skeleton be reversed? The key is to look at bones on the micro scale. Bone loss appears to be driven by thinning of trabecular bone. See that spongy looking bone in the right of the picture? That's trabecular bone. It's found throughout your body, like at your wrist, your ankles, and your spine. In space, trabecular bone thins. What's worrisome is that the trabeculae may thin to the point that they disconnect from one another, making the spongy holes larger. When this happens, bones get weaker, and there is no way for the trabeculae to reconnect. Astronauts might build new bone when they return to Earth, but the structure won't ever look the same. Findings from the T-bone study will help future astronauts by identifying those at greatest risk of bone loss before spaceflight and informing preventative measures like exercise. These results are also important for you and I, who live with our feet firmly planted on the ground, because space studies give us an accelerated way to understand and prevent bone loss on Earth.